Hey, I'm Ossie from Three Monkeys Solderless, home of the world's best cables for your pedal board. Got the audio solo kit here. If you're interested in just checking one of them out, you can grab one of these things. Got DC connectors, got all kinds of cable. So check us out at the link below, threemonkeyssolderless.com. All right, so skipped last week. Didn't really have much to say. Still waiting on parts. All kinds of parts coming in. Got a lot of work that I got to do that I'm getting through. So just kind of exhausted. So I figured last week we'd take the week off and pick it up again. So on the Carina build, I ordered a set of, I figured I'd compromise, right? Because on that guitar there was I couldn't figure out what kind of tuners I had originally set my mind to putting on the thing, whether they were, the old style, or like a newer style, and neither one seemed to fit. So I was like, all right, there must have been a unique set of tuners that I had that I, was going to use on this guitar that somehow ended up on another guitar or got lost in the shuffle. So what I found, which is kind of cool, are these Tone Pros, a new type of thing. It's probably been out a few years, I don't know, but it's a sealed tuner with a 20-to-1 gear ratio, as well as kind of like the vintage style plastic keys on there, right? Which look kind of like a honey color or a cream honey color, a little yellow in there. Very nice looking tuners in a nickel, which I think will match everything really good. And I like the sealed tuners better than like the old style, like, Kluson sort of, gear sort of like tuners. Those are very sensitive. They have a little bit of a slop to them. So they're not as great as like a sealed Godot or something like that, or a Grover. So these I'm expecting to be really nice. So I'm going to put those on. Got some different rings coming again from All Parts, a cream switch tip. And then, we can get to putting that guitar together for sure. So in the meantime, I guess there's been a lot of activity on YouTube with some more material being released, specifically live material. There was also, I didn't get a chance to compare it yet, but some of Diver Down studio sessions again, which, there were some of out during the summer, somewhere around that time. To my mind, these ones, the new ones, and I think all of it's gone now, but the newer ones sounded different, and it sounded more like Eddie's amp, what you would expect it to sound, rather than the way that Diver Down kind of sounded, which was a little bit darker. So I think obviously, mixing and the mastering process, the EQing, how the person's treating it, the engineer and the producer and someone who's responsible for mastering treats it, really has a huge effect on the end product. But also during what was it? Some of the live stuff, there was a bunch of stuff related to 1984. Let me get a drink here. Still can't quite get over the frog. There was a bunch of live recordings, I think from Madison Square Garden around that time, which were used in like the Panama video. And these were like the live videos, and it seemed like a board recording to go along with the video. And in places you can really hear Eddie's Marshall really have that splat out kind of crashing sound, that, splatty distortion that you heard on the the Eruption overhead mics that were released years ago. So it's like, yeah, that amp, honestly, I don't think it really changed his setup, or at least it was very similar on the 1984 tour as it was on, around the time of recording Van Halen 1. To my ear, it still had that issue with the amp, with the loading, how the tubes were being run, the bias, all that kind of stuff was still there. So that I found surprising, right? Because you also hear a lot of people, and people have been texting with me about it, about, the David Letterman tone, right? And that amplifier, I mean, I don't know what, this is all kind of a lot of guesswork and hype, sort of like theorizing about this. So don't take anything that I'm saying as like, I know what happened, because I don't. So yeah, what was used in that Letterman performance is it's around that time right? Us Festival, 1984 tour, all those sorts of things, where his tone around them was just stupid bright and kind of tinky. Now, some of it you could say might be related to the guitar, but a few guitars were used on those in those different shows and on Letterman, and they sounded like that, right? So you had the original Frankenstein. You could say, oh, maybe the pickup was broken and it sounded more like a Stratocaster. Okay. But then the Kramer guitars came in and same thing. So what was going on with that Letterman sound? I don't know. I mean, I haven't really spent a lot of time on that. I'm still like, just today we might get a little bit into two, right? Some interesting things on two, or that I think are interesting, that I've always liked about two. But around that time, I don't know. I don't know how much leeway they would give Ed in that studio, Letterman studio, to play, loud. I don't think so. I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I've been to see the taping of that show, and I could say, it ain't big. Well, later on when he was playing in the Ed Sullivan Theater, I saw there. I think the guest was, who was the guest then? Was it, I think it was Stevie Nicks might have been the guest when I went to see him at Ed Sullivan Theater. But the other studio, the old studio from the 80s, was small. I mean, it was ridiculous. So I don't know how, they could, really get away with getting a decent recording that loud. I've thought all kinds of things about what could have been used at that point. And, there's two other possibilities, one of which is clearer to me as being not possible than the other. So, also this is, evidence for it is in those 84, around that time, videos that were just released, particularly the Donington sort of rock festival videos where they're backstage, and there's one with Ed in the tuning trailer with the guitar player from Slade, and he's warming up and he's playing through a Gallien-Kruger 250 ML. And that is sort of like, it was an amp. I'm sure you all know what it was. It was about yay big. I have one. I bought one when I was, I don't know. I think when I went off to college is when I picked one up, because I was like going to live in a dorm room. And if my old roommates are there, especially Mick, if Mick is listening to this, it's hilarious that they put up with me. They probably did. But it was, or Andy, if Andy's there too. He used to borrow my 212 cabinet. I got a little 212 cabinet, a Randall, and the GK head for the dorm room, because he couldn't bring stuff like that into, what amounted to a cinder block prison cell. So the GK, I'm very familiar with the way that sounds. And he was using one. And to me, it sounds like, a 100-watt Rockman. It has that kind of sound to it. So I don't think it was the GK. It could have been, because you can mic things a little bit differently. And you can, do soundboard things, and you can kind of remove some of that. But you can always kind of tell when a Gallien-Kruger is being used. It has a thing to it. The other possibility was that there was an ADA MP1 in his rack somewhere. That I got from two sources. Right around that time, I'm going to say, was when I started, more working on amplifiers, or getting really interested in that, of the different guys that were modding things. And Harry Colby was in New York, and I was in New York. So I went over there, right? And I went by there a bunch, and, tried to kind of look and see what was going on, and, get some talk. I got an amp done by Harry, which was cool. I was like, went and got a JCM 800 to have Harry mod for me. And, he did it, and it was a cool amp. I wish I still had it. But, talking to Harry, he said that he went to a couple of the shows around that time at Madison Square, and he said he had an MP1 in the rack. He saw the rig and he was like, it's an MP1. It's not a Marshall. I was like, it's got to be a Marshall. He's like, no. It's an MP1. I saw it. He's using an MP1. So I was like, all right. And then, a magazine article with Rudy Lyron was available somewhere around that time. Again, it was, I think it was the one where he's got the picture of himself where he's holding the guitar like this. Rudy is, and they're talking about, it's in black and white, and it's a little sort of like gear rundown on one page. I'm sure you've all read it a million times. And in that he calls it an ADA MP1 preamp, or an ADA preamp. And, it could be that, I don't know. The Magic Marshall is there. I mean, you can see that it had the torn, Tolex right about there, no logo. It looked like it. It could have been that amp too, because I don't think his amp was very loud the way he had it set up. I think it could have been, not like a blow you over kind of thing. So it's possible. So I don't know, but it was interesting. I think that that sort of crashed out splatty sound was in that amp, even in the 1984 tours. So I think that was cool, just to kind of like hear that. I'd like to hear more, I think, studio stuff than the live stuff. Because the live things are interesting, yeah, but it always seems like it comes down to, it all pretty much has a very similar flavor to it. And then it comes down to like what kind of gear the guy had in his jacket, who's bootlegging the thing, to what it sounded like. And, it's cool, but I want to hear sort of more of like sort of the studio outtakes to kind of hear what, Don and Ted and Eddie were coming up with in terms of, the recording techniques, because that is, it was really interesting to me how he got these really kind of, very psychedelic, very interesting sort of like sonic landscapes to his sound, and how smooth and how refined they were in a way, yet had an edge to them. So that, I thought that was always very cool. So what I've been doing, aside from building gear for people, I mean, it's been some stuff, I guess, out in California everybody knows about. So I've been doing a little work for folks out that way that have lost a lot of stuff, which is not good. But I've also been still kind of like experimenting a little bit with this Pro Q 4 Fab Filter EQ tone matching thing with the Marshmallow and the Aux. So I was just, listening, and like this morning, I was listening to a little bit of 2 for a quick second when I was working out, and I was like, you know what, it'd be kind of cool to kind of like see about, what Eddie's sound was like, in that album, like what were the different EQ points and tone matching that, and then looking at that sound, because it has a very unique kind of, hollow sort of sound to it. So that's sort of what I did, a quick and dirty one of those, and I have it in the GarageBand already kind of up and done, and I could just sort of like, work through it, and we could see what it sounds like. But I think it's running right now, isn't it? I think it should be. Yeah. No feedback because I'm not using the sustainer. Should have the mic turned off for that too, so you can hear it better. So it definitely has some hollow stuff to it. So let's take a look at the GarageBand and see what that sort of what that looks like in there. Band where I have a pretty simple sort of setup for this, for the Dead or Alive sort of tone matching thing. So I've got the mic, obviously. I've got Ed's beginning of it where there's no drums, which, you know, makes it easier for the EQ, the Fab, whatever you call it, Pro Q4, to kind of work its magic. And then I just have a guitar channel that has the reverb and one that's dry. So I just thought I'd show you sort of what that sort of sounds like. Let me remove this real quick because that was the track that I just used to match too. But let's listen to what Ed's track sounded like, and you can kind of hear. We could probably get the feedback if we use the sustainer guitar. Be kind of cool. All right, so you look at just like the reverb side. I'm using the Sunset Sound plugin again, which I like. So I'm using the chamber from Studio One. I mean, this is just spaghetti thrown against the wall, so don't try, bother copying any of this stuff. It doesn't really. You could probably do a better job if you spent more than 30 seconds. So I've got a little bit of I got the low pass filter, 2 kilohertz, the high pass at 334 hertz. I've got a low end boost of 3 dB and a high cut of 12 dB. And it's 100% wet, 50% decay, and a 20 millisecond pre-delay on the reverb. So what that ends up sounding like alone, maybe it needs to be boosted up a little bit, is something like this. So let's go back. I just muted the dry channel. All right. So what this sounds like alone is... So I think that sounds a lot like 2 to me. And it's interesting, that the, if we listen to, let me get out of this. If we listen to this without the Pro Q on there, so here's the filter, right? This is the EQ. Look at all the different points. So you got a lot of boosts in fundamental places that are related to the tuning of the guitar, like 425, 109, 1.2K, boost up around 12K, a big cut right here. So, I think with the Running with the Devil thing, I wrote down all of these cue points and then picked out ones that I thought were fundamental to the sound. Because I think, sometimes the Pro Q maybe gives you too much information and it doesn't sound right for every instance of the song. Like for this, it sounds perfect at. But let's say for a different sound, for a different song, it may have some let's say conflictions in it. All right. So if we were to take, another song like, that actually doesn't sound too bad. We might have to look at this, but let's hear it without this EQ so you can see what the EQ is doing to this, right? So you can see how it gives you that really hollowed out sound, which, some of it was probably a result of the miking technique in the room, but I'm sure there was also a little bit of EQing. So that's, an interesting thing because that second record has that very unusual sound, and it's more related to the recording technique, I think, than the way that amp sounded on that day, right? Or that year, because we could see, the 1984 clips, it still sounds like, it has those distortion characteristics it did on Van Halen 1. So, there's sort of a theme running through this, and then the differences seem to amount to how it was recorded, how it was mixed, and how it was mastered. And I think Ed even said that himself at one time when he was asked, what are you using for an amplifier for this album? He's like, same old Marshall. He goes, but for some reason it always ends up sounding different. Well, yeah, I think that's, that seems to be proving itself out. So was there, modifications to his amplifier that were, going beyond, what we were, beyond the loading and the setup of the amp, right? Like how the amp is biased, how it's loaded, what's the reflected impedance back to the tubes, that kind of thing. Was there anything more than that? I don't know. I'm not sure. I can't really say for 100% sure. So again, let's just listen to some other stuff here too, right? So we'll go to here. I'm going to mute this out. So this is the dry without the reverb, which I think sounds good for that, but I'm curious why. I think it's kind of close. It's there's a little too much high end in it, I think, but it's so hard to tell because I'm using these really crappy kind of headphones, and you go into the studio monitors, it sounds a little different. So, we're kind of trying to find a reference point for all this stuff. Add in the reverb again, So it doesn't sound too bad for that, but let's say for something like, let's just try this and see what it sounds like. The guitar isn't exactly tuned for that song compared to the other ones, but it doesn't sound quite right. It sounds a little bit bright, right? Has still a lot of that sort of like high end, like. So if we were to, cut some of that out, it might, be a little bit better. So for that sound, maybe not. I mean, also, it's in the Fab, filter is trying to basically match to that, right? Which is not the same as, although it kind of is. It's different, but how does it also respond to, let's say, like, his sort of like single note stuff, right? So it still sounds a little bit bright, right? Forget it. It's not easy being the Teddy, I tell you. All right, so did you hear it without the EQ on this channel? I'm not sure whether we did that. So let's just do that, so you can just hear what it adds. So that's just the sound of like the marshmallow. You can hear all that right here, all just being boosted to God. Right? So you can hear how, that you can make an amplifier kind of like sound that way based upon, I think obviously in this case it had multiple factors that was making it sound big and hollow like that. But it's, it's not the way that the amplifier sounded through the speakers. All right. So that's like one of the things I think that I do believe I could say, which is really kind of helpful, I think, is that the sound that you hear on these records is not what was coming out of those speakers. So to kind of like grab an amplifier, like grab your Marshall and your 412 cabinet and then trying to, think it's going to sound like that, look at this EQ curve and look at the Q points, like narrow Qs, wide Qs, multiple cuts and boosts in the same regions, sort of like a comb, kind of like filtration to it. That would be a result of sort of like delayed signals or signals that are slightly out of phase with one another and slightly delayed from one another will create cancellations that you would see like this right next to each other, like this. Look how it is. It's like missing tooth, missing tooth, missing tooth, missing tooth. That's something that you're not going to get by, using a GE10. It's not going to happen. I mean, there's some things that make you kind of feel that way, like you boost up to 300 or 400 hertz and a little bit of low end. It's like, well, that sounds closer. And yeah, it does, but it's not quite the same thing. So I think that's an interesting thing to kind of grasp too, is that, the amplifier, I think, it seems more and more like, Ed's telling the truth. The amplifier wasn't really modified in the sense that there weren't different parts in it. There wasn't a preamp tube in it. I don't think any of that was the case, or were there, like diodes in it, or were there, the master volume, or I just think it was the way it was set up and then how they recorded it seemed to be the case. Or at least that's what's making sense to me. That's just me. And I am probably, as usual, completely wrong about everything. So, this is all fun. Don't take it too seriously. All right. So I think that's kind of cool for, like getting sort of like something that's close to a Van Halen 2 sound with the marshmallow. I should say also what I was using is, the guitar with the red pickguard. So it has a Floyd Rose and a custom in it. And that guitar sounds, to my ear, brighter than the white guitar does with the custom in it. So it doesn't sound as good to me for Van Halen 1. But I'm thinking Van Halen 2 had a different guitar as well on it. Something, maybe that was the beginning of the Floyd Rose kind of like era with like a prototype on non-fine tuning Floyd on a guitar that he was using. Or it could have been that he was using, the same stuff again. But, it stayed in tune pretty good, but then again, you're in the studio, so if it goes out of tune, you can do it again. So who knows? It could have been the beginning of like using something like the Bumblebee or having, that same tremolo on the Frankenstrat for these dive bombs and things like that. So anyway, that's my thoughts for today. So let's get out of here and go back in the room. So I thought that was a little bit interesting, at least. Keep moving towards different sounds, different albums. I think it might be interesting to do some, maybe do some of the women and children first sort of sounds, which were, close to one, but not quite. And just see, how the amplifier sort of performs under those different circumstances and see how it works, and then see like what kind of a pickup might work with it, because I think that's still important about like what pickup and how the guitar sounds itself. I think that definitely has an effect on how the amp starts to perform, how it distorts, and what frequencies are going to be sort of emphasized and de-emphasized, and what's there is very difficult to remove, and what ain't there is very difficult to put in. So just like if you're trying to take a picture of a horse, it's kind of hard to start with a picture of a dog. Although you can, morph the dog out, stretch its legs out in Photoshop and, make its head a little bit different, it's still going to look really whacked. So it's a good idea to start with the picture of the horse and not a picture of a dog. So, for this, like this guitar, I think works good for certain eras because it's out of tune. It's a little bit brighter than the white guitar, and it sounds a little bit more lively, not as dead. So, I think you could probably make this one work, but, I haven't found much success to my ear and with the way I do things and with my setup with the Floyd Roses for like one. It just doesn't seem to cooperate. It always seems like you hear that sound of a Floyd Rose is unmistakable. I mean, you could put me in a room with 200 guitars and only one of them has a Floyd Rose in it, and I'm pretty sure I could pick it out, blindfolded. It just has a very unique sound to it. So, again, the first thing in the mix is probably the most important, which are, we won't go there. All right, so anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.